In 1914, three famous friends, Thomas Edison, Henry Ford, and John Burroughs, ventured into the wilds of southwest Florida for a camping adventure in the Everglades. Their campfire camaraderie inspired a series of camping trips throughout the next decade. Joined by another famous friend, Harvey Firestone, the four vagabonds explored a changing America, finding rest, relaxation, and inspiration in the nation's great outdoors.
Support for Into the Wild, Edison, Ford, and Friends comes from George M. Cox Trust.
By 1914, Thomas Edison, Henry Ford, Harvey Firestone, and John Burroughs were household names. Edison as the wizard of electricity, Ford as the maker of the car for every man, Firestone for putting tires on those cars, and Burroughs as the best-selling nature writer. For nearly a decade, these renowned men met for a series of camping trips where the self-styled vagabonds could, as Burroughs wrote, cheerfully endure wet, cold, smoke, mosquitoes, black flies, and sleepless nights just to touch naked reality once more. Their adventures and views of an ever-changing world were recorded by Burroughs and Firestone, providing a rare glimpse of the men behind their public personas. The world was fascinated with this most unusual camping clan, and the campers both courted and complained about the escalating press coverage of their trips. From their first foray into the wilds, it would be a quandary that would continue until the vagabonds' last trip in 1924. When word reached the Florida frontier town of Fort Myers that celebrity winter resident Thomas Edison would be arriving with guests Henry Ford and John Burroughs, town residents began frenzied preparations to welcome the superstars.
It's 1914. Ford is incredibly popular at this time. He has just instituted the 8-hour workday, which is totally novel, and the $5 a day pay rate. So he's very popular with common people. Edison has been vacationing here for a number of years, but this is the first visit for Ford and Burroughs, so it's a big deal.
A parade was planned, and a call went out to all Ford owners in the region. At a time when automobile ownership was still rare, 31 cars showed up.
There's about 3,000 people living in Fort Myers, and about 2,000 people show up for the parade. So it's a huge event. That's really almost the entire town.
Burroughs garnered as much attention as his high-profile companions.
Burroughs was a celebrity of his time, and a very different kind of celebrity than any that we have today. He was an author of 27 books. He's most remembered for his nature writings. He sold millions of books at the turn of the century. It's inconceivable today that a nature writer could possibly be so popular. We don't make celebrities of literary figures today as much as we did then, but if you think about it, this was before the time of compact discs, DVDs. The radio had yet to come along. So writers were sort of media stars. You could say that Burroughs was the Sting or Michael Jackson or John Lennon of his time. He was a big deal.
Burroughs had met Ford the year before and was meeting Edison for the first time. The veteran naturalist who had camped with Teddy Roosevelt in Yellowstone and trekked into the Grand Canyon with John Muir was eager to explore the Everglades and told reporters he hoped to, quote, hear a panther growl. Edison, ever interested in exploring the wilds of southwest Florida, organized a camping trip for the men.
Mina, who's Edison's wife, did put up a little fight about that. She wanted to be included in the trip. She considered the time in Fort Myers some of the only time she got with her husband. So she argued to be included and did win out, and the entire family ends up going.
Ford's wife, Clara, and their son, Edsel, also joined the growing group of campers. With few roads beyond the town limits of Fort Myers, the campers relied on 3 local guides to lead them into the remote reaches of the Big Cypress Swamp. Although supposedly roughing it, Ford brought along a few luxuries, including special bottled water from Poland Springs, Maine. Edsel Ford brought along the only camera. With no press intruding on their privacy, the campers were free to relax and be themselves. Their campfire chat sparked the beginning of a deep and lasting friendship between men who were rarely free from the celebrity spotlight. Ford was so taken by Southwest Florida and the chance to spend time with Edison that he bought the estate next to the inventor 2 years later. Ford first met the wizard of electricity, the man who had become his mentor and close friend years before.
Henry Ford worked for Thomas Edison for the Edison Illuminating Company, and in 1896 had a chance to chat with him and show him his invention, a gasoline-fueled motor that he was attaching to a quadricycle. So great opportunity to meet the great man, and the great man was charmed and interested, even though Edison at the time was actually working on electric motors for cars. But he told Ford it was a great idea, go forward with it, young man.
Ford eventually started the Ford Motor Company, and in 1908 introduced the Model T, the universal car. His assembly line wonder, the Tin Lizzie, began to irrevocably transform the American landscape. Burroughs, whose best-selling books celebrated the beauty of the natural world, was appalled. He wrote a series of scathing articles condemning the, quote, befouling incursions of the automobile. Ford, an avid bird watcher and fan of Burroughs, was so upset he shipped a brand new Model T to the famous writer.
Burroughs was skeptical about automobiles, and that they were a distraction, that they were kind of something that would clutter up nature. Ford saw them as a way to get people out in nature, as he put it, a chance to spend hours of pleasure in God's great open spaces.
Ford later wrote in his memoirs, "Out of that automobile grew our friendship, and it was a fine one." For his part, Burroughs found Ford and Edison good playfellows.
Edison loves jokes and good stories, a great mind and a great philosopher. Mr. Ford is a lovable man and a great machinist, a real nature and bird lover. John Burroughs.
Their sojourn in the swamp would inspire many more adventures into the wilds. Just a few months after the vagabonds' first camping trip, Europe was embroiled in World War I.
World War I will begin in earnest in August of 1914. In America, the Woodrow Wilson administration will declare neutrality. So Americans are watching this war from afar.
Edison, Ford, and their mutual friend Harvey Firestone, the Rubber King, watched the war closely, worried about America's dependence on foreign markets to meet its insatiable demand for rubber, an astounding 75% of total world production. A year after the start of the war, the three industrialists met at the Pan-Pacific Exposition in San Francisco, California, for the celebration of Edison Day at the fair. An impromptu jaunt into the countryside inspired a visit with another famous wizard, Luther Burbank, the renowned wizard of plants. Burbank's groundbreaking work in plant hybridization impressed Edison, who had begun thinking about a new project, finding or hybridizing a reliable domestic source of natural rubber. Their visit also revived interest in venturing once again into the wild.
All of us had such a good time that Mr. Edison proposed that we go camping next year. Mr. Edison was to decide where we should go. Harvey Firestone.
Firestone met Edison at the Edison factory in New Jersey, and they headed north to meet Burroughs at his summer home in the Catskills. Camp was pitched in Burroughs' apple orchard, but their camping compatriot wasn't interested in venturing beyond the comforts of home. The 79-year-old host was ailing, but changed his mind after enjoying dinner from what he dubbed their Waldorf Astoria on wheels. Although Ford sent word that he couldn't join the group, the remaining vagabonds set off for a tour of the Adirondacks, determined to enjoy the great outdoors and the simple life, with a cook, 5 servants, and a truck crammed full of camping equipment and food. Edison served as navigator and rule maker, and decreed there would be no shaving, a rule which the fastidious Firestone ultimately broke. Edison was determinedly on vacation, remaining unshaven as he guided the convoy along the roughest, most remote back roads he could find.
We never know where we're going, and I suspect he doesn't either. He rides in the front seat of the front car and directs the caravan by compass. He dislikes paved roads, and he never does take us into a large town if he can find another way around. When he thinks we've gone far enough, he decides to camp, and then we camp. Harvey Firestone.
Firestone undertook the responsibilities of general manager, commissary officer, and poet laureate, commemorating highlights of their trip in verse.
In days of old, they made their way, scout, pioneer, landlubber, across trackless hills and plains. They do it now on rubber.
Burroughs, the renowned naturalist, served as the group's beloved Dean of the Outdoors.
What a pleasure it was to have with us a man of Mr. Burroughs' characteristics to lure us away from the busy world of material and business developments. Harvey Firestone.
When he wasn't taking naps or reading, Edison spent hours cutting plant stems, searching for milky sap producers that held promise as a source of natural rubber, earning him the affectionate camp title of flower gatherer.
At the time, America was approaching war, and all of the industrialists of the era were all worried about America's natural resources. I don't think the camping trips in themselves portrayed the men any differently than they were on a day-to-day basis. They were very inquisitive, very inventive, always looking for solutions, for new ideas, and that would have happened regardless of what the environment was.
After 2 weeks of R&R in what they dubbed Nature's Laboratory, the vagabonds headed home. Despite Edison's bone-rattling routes, Burroughs credited the vibrations of the motor car and their lively campfire chats to restoring his health.
It was a glorious trip, and a great pleasure to see Edison relax and turn vagabond so easily, sleeping in his clothes, curling up at lunchtime on a blanket under a tree, and dropping off to sleep like a baby. John Burroughs.
Although the trip was deemed a success, it would be more than a year before the vagabonds ventured again into the wild.
The coming of the war found us with our hands too full to take any time off or gadding about, and it was not until 1918 that we had our next trip, and it was the best one we ever had. Harvey Firestone.
This time, Ford joined his fellow vagabonds and a growing entourage of friends, photographers, and help for a trip through the Smoky Mountains and the Shenandoah Valley of Virginia. Ford became the caravan's mechanic and eagerly rolled up his sleeves to tackle any sort of mechanical problem encountered along the way. Any community that heard the vagabonds were on their way lined the streets and clamored for speeches or contributions to local causes, perhaps inspiring Edison to veer off the main roads, seeking remote campsites and anonymity. The campers indulged in whimsical stops along the way, hopping on a logging train and helping a farmer cradle and bundle his oat crop. Surging streams and the untapped potential of water power also proved irresistible to the troop.
I doubt if we ever passed an abandoned mill without Mr. Edison and Mr. Ford getting out to measure the force of the stream, inspect the old wheel, and talk about the ways and means of putting the waste power to work. Harvey Firestone.
Media coverage, including photos taken by Ford's own camp photographer, galvanized public interest in the four geniuses and helped reinforce Ford's image as a real-life American folk hero.
Ford participated in these camping trips because they were a break from the normal routine. There was also a publicity side to this. This was an opportunity for this somewhat remote figure who's now a millionaire to be seen as a down-to-earth figure. And when you're selling a down-to-earth car, it doesn't hurt if the guy who is at the top of the pyramid is seen as some kind of a regular guy.
Ford jumped into camp life with boyish enthusiasm, cutting wood for the campfire and organizing impromptu shooting contests. Burroughs admired his energy and intellect.
No poet ever expressed himself through his work more completely than Mr. Ford has expressed himself through his car and tractor engine. They typify him. Not imposing nor complex, less expressive of power and mass than of simplicity and adaptability and universal service. John Burroughs.
To the octogenarian observer, however, Edison was the heart and soul of the vagabonds.
He is a great chemist, a trenchant and original thinker on all the great questions of life, a practical scientist, plus a meditative philosopher of profound insight. We all delighted in his wise and witty sayings. He's a good camper out and can go with his hair uncombed and his clothes unbrushed as long as the best of us.
Even in the roughest weather, when the other vagabonds opted for a hotel room and a hot bath, Edison preferred to remain in camp, reading at night by the light of a special storage battery system he rigged up for the campsites.
But he's not a hard leader, for he does not insist on getting out early in the morning. The chief trouble is in getting him to bed. He likes to sit up until at least midnight, talking by the campfire. Harvey Firestone.
Campfire conversations ranged widely, covering everything from the literary merits of Shakespeare to the Great War, rubber production, and food reform. The war was a constant topic of conversation, and according to one observer, the Huns came in for their share of censure and cussing. The topic of war inevitably spurred talk of rubber and America's dependence on foreign production. Edison's growing interest in finding a domestic source of natural rubber and his firm ideas of fostering a self-reliant America generated spirited conversations. Their shared passion for his project would ultimately inspire Edison to form the Edison Botanic Research Corporation with his fellow vagabonds Ford and Firestone. Another heated topic of debate centered on food reform. Although Firestone supplied the camping caravan with gourmet food cooked by professional chefs, Edison rarely indulged in the fancy fare, inveighing against eating anything that hadn't been heated to the boiling point, and warning that cane sugar created crystals in the blood. Despite his caveats, the campers watched Edison blithely forget his dietary advice and dump heaping spoonfuls of sugar into his coffee, eat pie by the yard, and gulp down soda pop. Burroughs laughingly told the inventor,
"Oh, consistency, Thy name is not Edison.
For the 1919 return to nature's laboratory, the vagabonds headed to New England with a new innovation in luxury provided by Ford, 2 specially designed pantry and kitchen cars. The procession that wound its way through the mountains included 50 vehicles and an ever larger entourage of reporters and photographers. One driver joked that the trips were about as private as a Hollywood opening. Fascination with the celebrity camping clan continued, and increasing publicity of their expeditions helped popularize a brand new hobby, recreational camping. With the ever more affordable Model T, leisure travel was no longer reserved for the rich and famous.
Every 2 years or so, the price of the Model T is going to go down. So by the time you get to 1921 or so, the Model T is now about $300. Automobiles are going to change the American landscape. They're going to change the way people live, the way they work, the way they play.
Ford's universal car, the Tin Lizzie, opened the door to a new type of traveler, the tin can tourist. The Vagabonds' 1919 trip through New England proved to be the last the 4 famous woodsmen would enjoy together. In the late fall of 1920, the 4 vagabonds and their wives gathered together for a few days of rest and relaxation at an inn near Burroughs' home. As usual, Ford instigated a tree-chopping contest, which the 83-year-old Burroughs won. Afterwards, the group gathered around a campfire to cook Burroughs' famous brigand steak. It was the last time the famous foursome would be together. Burroughs died just a few months later. The 3 remaining vagabonds met again in 1921 for their annual and ever more elaborate expedition into the wild. Their tenting tour through the mountains of Maryland included their wives and the usual entourage of chauffeurs, chefs, and photographers. Firestone also invited a longtime friend to join them, Warren Harding, President of the United States.
This is a time when businessmen were still national heroes. Here were 3 of the most successful businessmen. Henry Ford was probably the preeminent businessman in the country. He was easily the Bill Gates of his day.
As usual, Edison's portable power plant provided light for the camp and electricity for a new refinement, a player piano. In the dining tent, a large circular table fitted with a rotating Lazy Susan top made it easy for diners to reach any dish. Under the watchful eye of the Secret Service, the press corps eagerly snapped shots of the residents of Camp Harding. The vagabonds didn't camp together again until the summer of 1923, when Ford hosted his friends for a cruise on his yacht, the 300-foot Cyalia, and a tour of Michigan's Upper Peninsula. The expedition had elements of a business trip as the celebrated trio and their wives toured Ford's logging camps, sawmills, and mines, and test drove vehicles fitted with Firestone's new balloon tires. A year later, during their last joint expedition, Ford hosted the vagabonds again, this time at his newly purchased Wayside Inn in Sudbury, Massachusetts. He envisioned the 17th century tavern as a living museum of American history. Instead of camping, the vagabonds stayed at the inn and ventured on short excursions through the countryside. Day trips included a visit with another president, Calvin Coolidge. President Coolidge presented Ford with a special antique for his museum, an 18th century maple sap bucket. Edison stole the spotlight, however, with his witty retorts to the press. When asked if Silent Cal Coolidge would be re-elected as president, he replied, "Sure, if he doesn't talk too much." Edison then presented Mrs. Coolidge with the compass he had used to guide the camping caravan over the years. The constant press of the paparazzi had become too much. The famous friends would meet many more times over the next several years, but their freewheeling days as the vagabonds were over.
Instead of a simple gypsy-like fortnight on the road, we found ourselves in the midst of motion picture operators, reporters, and curiosity seekers. We became a kind of traveling circus, and although all of us were accustomed to a degree of publicity, it became tiresome to be utterly without privacy. Harvey Firestone.
For nearly a decade, the vagabonds fascinated the world with their expeditions into the wild. Their camping camaraderie offered a brief respite from the pressures of everyday life, and a rare glimpse of the famous friends who changed the world.